In one small strip of ground north of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, whole Russian units are vanishing into mud, fire, and silence. On most maps, this area looks like a side note called Dobropillia, but Ukrainian commanders have turned it into the place where Moscow's big push toward Pokrovsk starts to bleed. While Russia throws tens of thousands of troops and armored vehicles at one of Ukraine's last major defensive hubs in Donetsk, General Syrskyi has opened a counterattack on the northern flank, clearing trapped Russian pockets and forcing the enemy to pull units away from their main spearhead. Western analysts from major outlets have quietly described this move as an attempt to pinch or squeeze back the Russian thrust near Pokrovsk. Yet the real picture on the ground is even harsher than the headlines suggest. Tonight's report breaks down how this hidden northern fight, driven by drones, artillery, and brutal internal pressure inside the Russian army, could decide what happens next around Pokrovsk. If you want clear frontline breakdowns of weapons, battles, and the politics behind them, stay with Military Force and remember to like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Russia is trying to break the Eastern Front by turning Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad into the center of a deep attacking wedge. For Moscow, this area is more than two city names on a map because it is a road hub, a supply knot, and a morale symbol for both armies. Russian planners want a bulge that pushes far into Ukrainian lines so that defenders must either pull back or risk being closed in from several sides. To feed that plan, units from many regions have been sent in with armor, artillery, and fresh infantry, and reports from Western analysts say the tempo of fire and losses there is among the highest seen in 2025. For viewers who follow wars closely, this means Pokrovsk is not a local skirmish, but a pressure point that can shape the whole Donetsk front. On the northern shoulder of this battle sits the Dobropillia sector, which used to look like a side piece of the main fight. Earlier clashes and Ukrainian counterstrikes left several Russian groups stuck there in half-cut pockets, still armed, still dangerous, and able to watch the approaches toward Pokrovsk. Those pockets could act like small fortresses, giving Russian artillery observers good ground and letting assault groups hit Ukrainian flanks whenever the main push moved forward. General Syrskyi and his staff looked at this layout and saw a risk that did not show up in simple troop counts. If those isolated groups survived, they could help close a future ring around Pokrovsk by attacking from behind when Russian forces advanced from the south and east. He chose a different answer, and it was not to wait and hope the pockets would run out of strength on their own. Syrskyi opened a counteroffensive toward Dobropillia with a clear double purpose, because every move had to serve more than one goal. The first aim was to hunt down and remove the trapped Russian formations so they could no longer anchor fire positions or threaten Ukrainian supply roads in that area. The second aim was to steady the local line so that assault brigades and air assault units could be pulled out of pure defense and turned into a mobile force for hitting the northern flank of the main Russian grouping. Instead of throwing every available soldier into the front of the Pokrovsk fight, the plan tried to use limited reserves to cut into the side of the attacking mass. This design forces Russian commanders into a hard choice, because they must either send precious reserves north to protect their flank or accept that their big push is being covered by a thinning shoulder. If they rush units to Dobropillia, the weight pressing on Pokrovsk becomes lighter. But if they leave the flank exposed, a sudden Ukrainian strike could break open their line from an unexpected angle. That is the strategic frame behind the headlines, and it is inside this frame that the brutal scenes from small villages and muddy farm roads around Dobropillia begin to make sense. Russian units that tried to hold villages like Zadashny and Nikonorivka are now scattered along farm tracks in a way that shocks even hardened analysts. Fresh footage and satellite-based mapping show bodies lying beside dirt roads at regular gaps of 10 or 15 meters, with more forms visible under tree lines and in drainage ditches. These scenes point to groups that were hit while pulling back or shifting positions, because many men fell in open ground instead of inside prepared trenches. Commentary from Ukrainian gunners and drone crews says they watched columns move across fields that had already been measured, marked, and ranged in advance. Once the first shells landed, infantry tried to break away in small knots, yet camera feeds from overhead caught those attempts and passed new coordinates down the chain. Some squads tried to dig quick foxholes near forest edges, but quadcopters hovered high enough to track every shovel of dirt and call in more strikes. What began as a simple withdrawal turned into a string of small disasters, and the pattern along those country lanes is the result of that chain of decisions. Under that kind of pressure, the number of Russian soldiers who choose surrender instead of one more dash across exposed ground has started to climb. Reports from the sector describe drone operators fitting loudspeakers onto airframes, then sending them along trench lines to broadcast clear, simple orders in Russian. The messages tell men to put weapons down, stand up with hands raised, and walk in a set direction while the drone circles above as a visible guide. In several clips, small groups from 3 to 9 troops answer these calls by waving improvised white flags, or even holding up paper sheets with the words that they want to give up. The drone then moves a short distance, waits for them to follow, and repeats the pattern until they cross an agreed point where Ukrainian escorts are waiting. In other cases, operators describe machines orbiting the same dugout or ruined house for hours, even for more than a day, before a frightened group finally steps out. This approach changes the classic risk for the capturing side, because infantry no longer need to walk into unknown positions that might be mined or covered by hidden fire. Instead, the unmanned craft keeps eyes on the location, checks that no one is aiming from behind, and marks a safe path that ground troops can later verify. The result is a strange mix of fear and relief on the faces of prisoners, who move under the constant buzzing sound that just destroyed their previous position. What looks from a distance like a road lined with bodies and scattered helmets is, up close, a story of men who saw the sky as both threat and escape. For anyone watching this conflict through the lens of weapons and doctrine, these drone-managed surrenders show how small machines now control not only death, but also the act of survival. That control from above is even more important when those same aircraft work together with artillery and rockets, because then the entire landscape can be shaped to block or break any reinforcements trying to reach the front. Ukraine is turning the Dobropillia sector into a live test of how drones and artillery can lock down an entire front. FPV drones race low over fields and hedges, hunting tanks, infantry carriers, and any group of troops that stops too long in one place. Operators sit miles away with goggles on, steering small quad frames loaded with shaped charges straight into engine decks or open hatches. When a vehicle survives the first blast and the crew runs for cover, hexacopters and other multi-rotors move in to finish the job. These heavier platforms can hover over a trench or a ruined house and drop small bombs through windows, doors, or dugout openings. Above both layers, long-range reconnaissance drones fly at higher altitude and scan wide areas for fresh tracks, heat signatures, and gun flashes. Their cameras and sensors feed coordinates back to fire control centers, where gunners adjust range and bearing in real time. The whole setup means Russian units are rarely alone on the battlefield, because something in the sky is almost always watching them. Once a target is confirmed, Ukraine brings in traditional guns and rocket systems that strike far beyond the line of sight of the drone pilot. Tube artillery with long barrels can hit assembly areas, tree lines, and crossroads, while rocket launchers reach deeper into rear routes. Systems like HIMARS and similar launchers carry guided rounds that land within a small error circle, which matters when fuel trucks or command posts are the aim. Each shot is not random, because the fire mission is built on precise data gathered in the minutes before the salvo begins. This is the kill chain in action, with each link supporting the others so that wasted ammunition stays low and moral impact stays high. A small scout drone picks up a moving column and tags the position. Then a relay passes the numbers to the nearest available guns. Rounds land along the road, force the column to stop or spread out, and in that moment, attack drones rush forward to pick off damaged vehicles. Survivors may drag wounded men into ditches or shallow craters, but the same network can swing fire again if movement is detected. The effect becomes even stronger when the ground itself turns against the attacking side, as it has during the autumn mud season. One reported convoy of about 5 armored vehicles tried to push along a soaked dirt route toward the Dobropillia line. 3 machines bogged down in deep ruts and soft soil, and the drivers could not free them without long recovery work. crews were forced to abandon metal hulls and wade through flooded ditches, carrying weapons and gear while their boots sucked into the muck. Thermal cameras on drones picked up the heat of the engines and the movement of men, and that picture turned into a priority strike call. Guided rockets hit the area first and smashed the road surface. Then FPV teams flew in to detonate charges on stalled hulls and support trucks. When the explosions died down, the route was blocked by twisted shells and burning fuel, and the chance of timely reinforcement was gone. Open-source videos from this axis show several columns in similar trouble, with tracks half buried and chassis listing to one side in the sludge. Mud, weather, and unmanned systems together have changed the cost of every Russian attempt to move heavy armor toward the front. That combination is important because it decides not only how many vehicles are lost on the way, but also how many troops are still in shape to fight by the time they reach the Pokrovsk battle line. Clearing the Russian pockets around Dobropillia is not just a local cleanup, it is quietly bending the whole offensive around Pokrovsk. When those isolated groups start to collapse, Russian staff officers can see that a supporting shoulder on the map is turning into a soft spot. Reports from Western think tanks and major newsrooms describe this as Ukraine trying to stretch the spearhead, because the tip is only as strong as its base. If one side of that base begins to crack, commanders feel forced to send reserve battalions away from their planned roles to patch the damage. Those battalions were meant to close a ring around Pokrovsk and Mirnorad, or to replace units burned out by constant assaults. Instead, they march or drive toward the Dobropillia line to hold villages that were never supposed to be the main prize. Each move north changes the rhythm around Pokrovsk, because fewer fresh companies remain available to keep the pressure steady on the main axis. Assault waves lose some of their weight, pauses between attacks grow longer, and damaged formations stay at the front for more days than doctrine allows. In heavy ground fighting, those pauses matter, since they give Ukraine more time to rotate defenders, repair dugouts, and bring in ammunition by back roads. While that shuffling takes place, the raw numbers around Pokrovsk still look frightening on paper to any planner who reads daily situation reports. Ukrainian and open-source tallies talk about roughly 27,000 Russian troops in the wider area, backed by up to a few hundred armored vehicles. Artillery and mortar systems in the sector are counted by the hundred as well, with multiple rocket launchers adding another layer of fire. President Volodymyr Zelensky has publicly said that Ukrainian units there face odds of roughly 8-to-1 in manpower and still hold the line. For any viewer who has studied campaigns from the past, that ratio would normally point toward a breakthrough if it were applied with full force. The problem for Moscow is that this superior mass is not pressing in a straight, unified way because it keeps being pulled sideways to seal gaps. Every company sent to reinforce Dobropillia is one less available to exploit a breach or to keep up momentum along the southern edges of the salient. The larger the grouping grows, the harder it becomes to feed and supply every battalion, especially when drones and artillery cut roads at key junctions. Fuel trucks, repair teams, and medical convoys must also be guarded, which means even more soldiers are tied to support duty instead of attacking. Under these conditions, numerical advantage starts to look more like a burden because each extra vehicle needs protection, maintenance, and a clear route forward. Dobropillia, in that sense, flips part of Russia's strength into a liability, as mud, distance, and precision strikes turn mass into long, vulnerable columns. This is why the fight over small pockets on the northern flank carries strategic weight far beyond those villages and crossroads. Yet maps and tables cannot show the full cost of such a plan, because behind every arrow and unit symbol stand men living under orders they do not control, and under a system that often treats them as expendable. Behind the maps and casualty charts, there is a darker system at work inside many Russian units on this front. Interviews with deserters and captured soldiers point to a brutal routine, where men are told they can avoid certain assault waves if they pay their officers. The sums they describe are not small for a conscript or a low-paid contract soldier, yet those who can scrape the money together hope it buys them a little more time away from the most exposed positions. Those who cannot pay or who refuse on principle say they feel marked in the eyes of commanders and push toward tasks that carry almost no chance of coming back. In this kind of climate, every attack order sounds less like a tactical plan and more like a sorting mechanism. And that feeling matters before a single shot is fired. Inside that culture, a cold word has spread through some units, and the word many of them use is reset. Soldiers explain that being reset does not mean a transfer or a rest period. It means being sent forward in ways that almost guarantee injury or death. If a unit has already watched one assault wave get cut down without proper support, orders to form up for another rush across open ground feel like a sentence, not a mission. When artillery and reconnaissance drones are active over the area, infantry know that each movement along a road or through a field is probably tracked in real time. So a push that might make sense on a staff map can feel like deliberate sacrifice to someone who has heard his officer joke about resetting a troublesome squad. In that environment, the appearance of drones with loudspeakers and clear surrender instructions is more than a technical trick. For some Russian soldiers, the small machine overhead is the only actor in the battle that offers a predictable path out alive. They listen as a flat electronic voice spells out how to put weapons down, how to step out of cover, and which direction to walk, and they compare that script with the silence from their own chain of command. Men who fear being pushed into another hopeless charge must weigh the shame of captivity against the risk of being reset into a ditch on the edge of a village. The steady stream of prisoners from this sector suggests that more and more of them are deciding that captivity is the lesser horror, and that choice tells its own story about morale. A force that runs on hidden payments and threats cannot keep the same level of focus as a force where orders are seen as tough but fair. When troops believe that survival depends more on cash and luck than on skill and planning, they stop taking initiative, and they start looking for exits. Over time, that mindset reduces the ability to sustain hard fighting around key points like Pokrovsk, no matter how many battalions appear on paper. Ukraine also uses these accounts in the information space, presenting them as proof that Russian losses are not only high, but also wasted by corrupt leaders. For international audiences who follow weapons and politics, these stories explain why a side that often has more artillery tubes and armored hulls can still fail to turn mass into a clean operational victory. They also put a human face on statistics because behind every destroyed column near Dobropillia, there may have been men who tried and failed to buy their way out of that last ride. They also put a human face on statistics because behind every destroyed column near Dobropillia, there may have been men who tried and failed to buy their way out of that last ride. When analysts judge the future of this campaign, they will have to consider not only drones, mud, and numbers, but also the quiet damage done when soldiers stop believing that their own commanders value their lives. On a flat map, Dobropillia, Zadashny, and Nikanorivka look like scratches on the edge of Pokrovsk. Yet on the ground, they are the places where Russia's northern flank is quietly being cut open. Ukraine is using drones, artillery, and pressure on morale to turn what should have been a solid shoulder of the offensive into a fragile arc that bleeds men, vehicles, and time. Each pocket cleared, each stalled column in the mud, and each group of soldiers walking out under a buzzing loudspeaker makes it harder for Moscow to turn mass into a clean encirclement. The price for every kilometer now includes not only burned armor and broken units, but also the hidden tax of bribes, forced assaults, and a reset culture that tells frontline troops how little their lives are worth. The real question is whether this northern fight can drag the campaign out long enough to blunt the plan around Pokrovsk, or whether it only buys a short pause before fresh formations arrive and the pressure returns. How leaders in Washington, Brussels, and other capitals read these weeks of combat will shape decisions on aid, air defenses, and the political space given to Kyiv to hold the East. If you want more clear, straight talk on battles like this, the weapons behind them, and the politics that follow, stay with Military Force and remember to like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss the next report.